Let's just go ahead and get started. We want to thank you guys for coming this evening. This is, I think, our fourth presentation with the issues with the future of the Rural Fire District. And we don't have a PA system here. Here we've got a couple handouts for you guys if you'd like. So if I'm not speaking up loud enough or Eric the same, raise your hand up so we can be sure to get our voice out there. Also, this is being recorded this evening. KLYC's Dave Adams is in the corner back here, being very quiet. Is streaming live. Yeah, he did. I saw they did the City Club this afternoon. We watched that. It was kind of interesting. I hadn't seen that before. So he will be streaming live for us. And also, I understood it would be available sometime later on YouTube.
As soon as you get home, it's probably will be up and ready to go. And we never delete anything to do, so we have it forever.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm John Fawcett on the Rural Fire Board, and Eric Berkwam also on the Rural Fire Board. There's 5 members of the Fire Board. Those not here, Tim Dietz, he has a fireman's background. Kathy Fitzgerald's a board member, and also Christian Burnish, he's president of the board at this time. And Lindsay Bershauer, yes, is here. She's newly elected to the board. She'll be replacing Kathy Fitzgerald after July 1st. And we've got TVF&R representatives here. Mike Dyke is chief of TVF&R. Also, Cassandra Ulven is public affairs chief. And Brian Sherrard is, I'm getting it right so far, division chief. And public affairs officer is Stephen Myers. Is here. So they will help field questions that we can't answer. I want to say I've been on the fire board for 38 years, and of all the meetings over those 38 years, until TVF&R issue came up with the city, in that time period, we've had less than 10 people ever, total 10 people ever attend fire board meetings. So this is very unusual for us, so it's been quite interesting all the way around. Just want to let you know that the fire board really wants the best safety and with the lowest risk for our residents, and we want to still be very good stewards of your hard-earned tax dollars. And like everyone else, we don't like to see our taxes increase, but we have a responsibility out here in order to provide you with the best emergency services, emergency rescue services and fire protection. And did everybody get, I assume most everyone at least did get the newsletter that we sent out? Did everyone get this? Because that's where we had the dates and times of the last 2 meetings, including tonight's meeting. And it was a really nice newsletter, folks, and it talked about what's going on with TVF&R. And the information that you have that we've handed out already this evening kind of dovetails in with that. The handout's a little bit more thorough than what was in the newsletter, but it's something to refer to as we go along. And we want tonight, the reason for these meetings is we want your input. We want to hear what you think about what's going on here. And we're cataloging that in our minds as we then proceed into decisions that the Rural Board will make as time goes by. So what we want to do is give you a decent background on what's going on. And so I don't have the IT capabilities at all with PowerPoint, so you're just stuck here with FP capabilities. That's felt point pen on poster board. The fire board is 5 members on the board. We're elected for 4-year terms. We don't have any staff. We're the staff. We don't have any employees. We don't have any buildings. We do have some fire equipment we'll be talking about a little later on. But I wanted to give you an idea of what the district looks like. You can see we're kind of like a bow tie around the city in the center. a large western side and a smaller eastern side. And to get from one to the other, you almost have to always go through the city. But to get some perspective here, this would be the county line between Washington County up here and Clackamas County over here. Dundee being down here, and their fire district borders us. Their rural fire district borders our rural district in this area here. Carlton borders in this corner right here, volunteer fire department, and this is volunteer and paid at Dundee. And Yamhill, other than a paid chief, is all volunteer department, and they're quite a ways from our border, but they are in this zone here. Little corner up here, Gaston takes care of. One of the issues here is you have to imagine then TVF&R has all this northern area down through this side over here on the east. They have access then to our district from Wilsonville, from Sherwood, and from Midway. They can access into our area for the fire district. And it becomes kind of important how we wind up, if we would take in the idea of having an option and build a station, you have to site it somewhere. And siting a station over here for the rural district is going to have to cross through the city even to get into this area here, so we have response times issues. And we're always looking for the risks and rewards of any kind of issue down the line. Let me show you here number 2. These are woodworking clamps that are on a camera stand. But here, the population of our rural district, and we just, thanks to Cassandra for working this up, and Stefan also, we're figuring about 6597 is what it currently is, and that'll shift as people move around, of course. We have 3,485 households. That's how many of these newsletters that we sent out just recently. So that's how many households are involved. The geographic area of the green rural fire districts, 55 square miles, right around just that. And the rural use of fire protection and emergency rescue services from the city in the last 5 years, and this is before TVF&R came on board, 16, 17%, right in that area. And that's been pretty consistent, you know, going decades back, because I've kind of monitored that over the years. The call volume here in the rural district in the last 5 years, now this is statistics before, or 2015 and back, so they're districts we had with the Newberg Fire Department. We averaged about 525 calls a year. Like in 2011, we had 478, and the last of these figures, 2015, we had just about 600 calls in that year. The emergency medical services calls, we're running about 65 to 85%. I think, would you say it's been more around 85% with what you guys do in TVF&R?
70%.
How much?
70.
70%. Okay.
Is that in Newberg as well, with the large retirement community, or is that throughout the district, you think?
It fluctuates.
Okay.
Older populations, we tend to see higher medical call volumes.
That's not mine, that's Eric's.
That's mine.
Yeah. So it gives you a fairly decent idea of what's going on in the district. And another thing that happens is, as far as number of calls, auto crashes are also a substantial number of calls that have to be dealt with by the fire department. The last city contract we had, we're just ending this fiscal year right now, as you probably realize, we contract with the city of Newberg for fire protection. That contract was $340,117, and we paid that in 3 installments as the year goes by. Oh, thank you. The district assessed value, and this is established in November of so it would be 2016 in November, was $943 million, just a little under that, but right in that area. So, roughly figuring, you can kind of back figure this, well, you'll know in a minute here, that we have a permanent tax rate of 43 cents a thousand. You multiply that by 943,000, and you can figure out how much we would wind up getting in taxes for the rural district.
Hey, John, but
Yeah.
if the mill goes away, is that going to change?
What will change,
The total amount we
the
take in?
permanent tax rate won't change. The permanent tax rate at 43 cents will remain that way, but the amount of tax dollars collected will go down as that evaluation would go
Because
away.
we've always tried to figure out exactly what it is. We've never been able to figure out an exact figure what, because the mill is in the rural district. And so how much of that amount we take in is from them, but that it will go away. And very likely, if it is annexed, if it is a housing development or something like that, it'll be annexed into the city. So it's probably always going to be gone. So we'll have less money on our contract, or less money coming in for us, very likely.
I think something like 60% or 70% is in the rural district of the mill. Not 100%, but it is a fairly decent percentage. One of the other things I wanted to kind of point out here too is the ambulance service areas is not under our control. The county commissioners establish ambulance service areas around the county, and the city of Newberg had the ambulance service area for 100 square miles. It included Dundee and Newberg Rural Fire and the city of Newberg and so forth. When TVF&R came into the picture, they then got that service area from the county commissioners. So we don't get involved in ambulance services. And what have you guys got any additional input as far as the calls? Could you kind of fill everyone in as far as what you see in calls that might be of interest?
So I'm Brian Sherrard, Division Chief with Plug Valley Fire and Rescue. As John was alluding to, specific to the rural district, you average right around 70 to 75% medical calls, and then the next largest percentage of calls are motor vehicle accidents, and then there is a small number of fires, and then what we would call miscellaneous calls, when people call in for various, call 911 for any reason, could be, smell of smoke, or, they crash seen but not heard, things of that nature, and that makes up the rest of the calls.
Good.
So, question there is, you mentioned automobile accidents, they're separate from the EMS calls?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's a different call type.
Okay.
And kind of interject some here.
Total calls?
I'm sorry?
You had the total calls of there are approximately 600.
Correct.
Were the auto crashes included in that total
Yes,
calls?
the total calls, yes.
So 70% of the total calls is EMS, and then that would leave 30% of those calls, of which probably, 25% of them are, 25% of the total would be vehicle crashes?
That's a great, Chief.
No, it's not that way. So 70% are medical, and the remaining 30% are made up of all those other call types that I was explaining, a portion of which are motor vehicle accidents. So, I have to look at the numbers, but I would guess probably around 10% of the calls would be motor vehicle accidents.
Okay.
And then what percent is miscellaneous?
Excuse me?
What percent is miscellaneous?
I'll look that up as we talk, and then I'll be able to give you the specific number for miscellaneous.
We get a really decent readout monthly. We did that, we got that from the city while we're many years with the city. TVF&R does a very, very nice monthly report for us that even gives us a geographic map and points where the calls were in a rural district. Very helpful.
And Chief,
Oh, this way?
and Chief, could you comment a little bit?
Right there.
Why you send a fire engine on an ambulance call for different things, for the EMS calls and for motor vehicle incidences?
Do you want to, how about we cover that in a little while? You
Perfect.
take it through
We-
your
we will have
presentation.
that.
Okay, perfect.
and
You
then
can
we
do
can
that.
talk about
Okay, perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Let's go in a little bit to the tax history over the years of what's happened in a rural district. In the 1940s, the district was formed. We've got a couple of file cabinets back here, and we've got some information that goes that far back, which is really kind of interesting. And we've contracted with the city for all that time period. During that, most of the time until the late 1997s, we were able to have an increase in the tax from one year to the next of 6%. So it was a 6% limitation that was always going on. We were concerned, and Stan Gabler here, raise your hand, Stan. Stan Gabler was 38 years also on the Rural Fire District. I got on 2 years after he did. And we had some concerns over all those years about the city maybe cutting us loose. You know, maybe we were more of a liability, and they cut us loose, and where were we going to get our fire protection and emergency rescue? So we decided as a board many years ago, well, let's buy some fire equipment. And even before we got started at that, we chipped in, just before I came on, we chipped in for that white water tender. We didn't have any ownership of it, but we put quite a few dollars in on that tender. We thought, well, why do that? Why don't we create a reserve fund and just kind of put a little bit of money away all the time, and then eventually be able to purchase some fire equipment? And we did. We currently have a water tender. That's a great big truck. It's got 3,000 gallons of water on it to rapidly dump water into a pool on a structure fire in the rural district, and then run back to get some more water, and constantly doing a roundabout to create a pool of water for the site to put out that structure fire. Anyway, we've got that piece of equipment now, and we have two brush rigs. They're kind of tandem wheel, large pickups that have fire suppression capability on them, foam capability, so they can get out into the rural district, housing areas, as well as field fires, and do some good for us. So we own those pieces of equipment, and we also have a replacement schedule with them, so that the equipment will be replaced as it reaches a certain lifetime. And that was the deal. That kind of locked us into holding that contract price down instead of having it accelerate on us over the years, more than 6% or whatever. Then in 1997, Measure 50 came along, and the public voted for this and for Measure 47 also, a different year, but it affected property tax rates. And that locked us in with our most recent draw on taxes. What the last year was that we took taxes out. It locked our rate in, and that rate is 4329 thousand. So if you look at your statement for taxes, you'll find a line item for Newberg Rural Fire Protection District, .4329. That's what will be charged against whatever the assessed evaluation of your property is. To give you an idea of how that works with the rest of the county, and these figures I'm going to give you would be not only permanent tax rates. In some cases, it will be a local option levy that's been added on to that, or like in Dundee's case, where they just built that new fire station, that will be added into it too. So now remember, we're 43 cents a thousand. Amity charges $2.21 a thousand. Carlton is $1.43 a thousand. Now this is current. This is the last data that we have. Dayton is $1.23. Dundee's $1.02. McMinnville is 95 cents. Gaston's $1.76. Sheridan's $1.47. Yam Hill's at 91 cents, and West Valley's $1.46 a thousand. So that's what the assessed valuation of individual property owners. That's what they're paying on. Okay, let's jump in to our next one, and I just want to discuss a little bit on the city issues. I mentioned today they had a city club, and Joe Hannon, the city manager, wound up talking about the issues with the fire department and why everything kind of came to a head, and they wound up doing something different than maintaining their own department. For the last decade, they had an increased call. So these last 10 years, about 42% increase in call volume over that time period. But they, through that time period, they had a firefighter freeze. So there was no new funds coming to hire new folks. Also, the equipment they had, the fire equipment, engines, vehicles, all that was aging and not being replaced because of financial issues. They had a decreasing volunteer support, reported to me actually by Chief Les Hallman, who was the last fire chief for Newberg. And part of that, I guess, is a nationwide average. You know, you guys are reporting to me there's a trend that volunteers, and matter of fact, Joe was reporting today that with two family incomes, you know, having two family incomes come into a household, there's just not the time to donate to some of these kind of issues. So volunteer services had declined. And with that in reference, I spent 2 hours talking with the Yamhill County Chief, Brian Jensen. I spent another 2 hours talking with Chief John Stock in Dundee. Both of them expressed the same thing. They can put some signs out, volunteers wanted and so forth. They maybe get a few nibbles on them, but not a lot of carry through. So they weren't getting the support that they needed to have. And they were experiencing that here in Newberg, trying to keep some engines staffed just for volunteers. And if I'm saying anything wrong there, correct me on that. So far, right? Okay. So the city decided that let's go take a look at our neighbors to the north, TVF&R, and see what they could do for us. And TVF&R has some, and we'll talk about some good points of what they bring to the picture, and they'll also give you that idea too. The city then, the way we understand it, the city council can actually make the decision to join TVF&R. There's some legal issues that are in the works on that. Don't know quite what's going to happen, but listening to Joe talk on the streaming video this afternoon, they're planning to do a vote in November. I don't know, a binding vote or a non-binding vote or whatever, but for the city patrons, he's going to recommend to the city council that they do have a vote. They've done some pretty extensive polling within the city and had some different kind of surveys that were done. I think they polled or surveyed 200 different people in the city and took those ideas and are going to carry that through. But the decision is supposed to be made this June 19th. So a week from this coming Monday, the city council is supposed to make a decision, and that was within this 2-year agreement that they had with TVF&R, that the halfway point they make a decision to go ahead and work toward annexation or pull back and try to recreate their fire department. So that's yet coming. And perhaps you guys have something you could add as far as the city is concerned at this point.
Sure. So, Mike Dyke, good evening, everybody. I'm the fire chief for TVF&R. We had a meeting with the city manager and the mayor, and exactly as John stated, there was a statistically valid. It wasn't they just cold called 200 people. They did a statistically valid survey and asked a whole litany of questions about level of support, level of interest. Really, so the city council would be equipped when they deliberate on the 19th, as one piece of information that they consider is, what do people think? Are they supportive of that? They asked a lot of questions on the finances, because clearly there's a lot of other things going on within the city that the city needs. The two most expensive things that the city funds, or services that the city funds today, are police and fire. And so they asked some questions around, well, could we take some of the money we used to dedicate to fire to police? And clearly in the end, the answer was no, we'd like you to refund everything or not tax us by whatever you used to tax for the fire department if TVF&R is to become the provider. Really the loud and clear, I think it was 60% said we want to vote on it. And it appears at this point the city, that the staff and the city manager said, it's my job to recommend to the council the staff recommendation. And his recommendation is put it to a vote, refund $1.88, which is the math he did in the budget that they had allocated. And it's difficult in a city budget because you're funding all these different things, but that was the dollar figure that he has factored in. And then really the third thing, I can't remember what it was.
Those are the two lead things.
Yeah, the big ones people want to know is, can I vote and how much money are we going to be refunded? So then it just creates this delta between the rate that the city used to allocate to fire and the rate that TVF&R charges. And people in the city are going to get to judge whether or not the additional staffing and resources, is that worth the extra, 20 cents. And TVF&R, I mean, we are able to, some people might ask, well, how can you do that much more with 20 cents? It's because we get to leverage the economy of scale. When John was showing all the different fire districts and departments throughout the area as comparators, every one of those has a fire chief, potentially a training person. There's a number of positions. TVF&R is a product of this process over our entire history. So we've had multiple agencies come together, and today there's only one fire chief. So there's not additional fire chiefs, there's not additional training staff. We have a training division that trains the entire organization, and you get to enjoy those economies of scale where we take the funds from particular communities, and that goes to deploying services out of the fire stations that serve those communities. So you get more bang for your buck, if you will. So.
Good. While you're up here, Mike, matter of fact, we'd like to have you explain what you guys bring to the city, with the contract issue, the number of folks that you have that they didn't have before, and the equipment and so forth.
And the importance of that for call time, response time, 24-hour coverage, all that.
Okay. Well, and just so I think that everyone's heard, but I mean, TVF&R, like I just said, we are a product of mergers and consolidations, and whenever that happens, it's because a community called us. We don't actively go out, and we're not dropping leaflets in cities asking for, hey, can we give you a quote? We got phone calls from the fire chief. Fire chief actually came over and had a cup of coffee with me and talked about the challenges they were facing, the dwindling number of volunteer firefighters, the fact that his budget didn't allow for him to have augment that with career staff to the level that he was comfortable with. And if Chief Hallman, the chief from Newberg that came over in this contract, if he were to stand here with you tonight, and I've heard him say this many times, he wasn't sleeping well at night because he was concerned for the community, and he was concerned for the rural district and the city, because there were nights when there were literally one firefighter on duty that would drive the engine out on a fire. The medic crew and the medic and the ambulance might be on a transport to Portland, and they were totally reliant on hoping the volunteers would show up to respond. And although the volunteers in the community were doing a great job, it didn't give him a lot of peaceful night's sleep, and that's why he came to talk to us about what could we do. And what we have been able to do is upstaff the station. So actually, as of June 1st, there's a minimum on-duty force at each fire station of 6 people. There's 4 on either the engine or the truck, depending on which of the 2 stations you're at. This station has a ladder truck. The other station is an engine company. And then there's the ambulance or the medic unit with two people. But all the apparatus that respond with the career crews, at least one of them, and in many cases multiple members of each crew, are paramedics. So we are able to offer advanced life support on every call. And we literally, it's to the level where we're bringing the emergency room to the living room. We're doing high levels of definitive care. That we know is something that the community really is interested in, and primarily because we run a lot of medical calls, and so it's an important skill set for us to have. The other pieces were the chief officer coverage was sometimes the career staff and sometimes the volunteer staff. And what we found for this is it's really important to always get command and control established, especially on substantial incidents. So we cited a duty chief, or there's a battalion chief that responds in his own vehicle or their own vehicle out of the Springbrook station. So between the two stations now, there's 13 people on duty every single day, 24/365. If one of those is sick or takes the day off, we backfill with overtime to fill those slots. And so the city never drops like they used to down to anything lower than those 4 and 2 on each vehicle. The water rescue capability, we augmented that. We had a water rescue team. We actually trained the staff here at the Springbrook to have a higher level of skill set and additional equipment. We continue to recruit volunteers. We're a combination fire department, so we actually just onboarded 50 volunteers. And you might be asking, well, you just said it's hard to recruit volunteers. We see about 80% of our volunteers are individuals that would like to make the fire service a career. And so we tend to be an attractive organization to recruit volunteers because if I'm someone that's interested in making that my job and I see an organization that hires a fair amount of people, it looks advantageous for them to volunteer with us versus some of the other communities. So we were able to recruit, and we will continue to recruit volunteers. And then really it's just been about, providing high levels of care throughout all the incidents that have been occurring in the community. We've been trying, we brought, and this might sound a little silly to you, but cardiac arrest is a significant issue in medical calls, and so we know from the science and the data that early CPR is important. So we launched CPR training through all the schools in the Newberg area. We actually have an application for that younger generation that will never put down their smartphone that will notify them if they know CPR to a nearby cardiac arrest to start treatment prior to our arrival. We have a very high survivability rate when it comes to that. And really we've spent a lot of time really trying to understand the community, looking at data. We're a scientifically deployed organization, so we've done risk analysis. We actually have a standard of cover that we've developed that talks about the types of risks in the community and how we would address those issues if they come up. So I don't know how much more detail you want.
They have some of that too on the handout that they had, what you guys have brought to the scene.
Okay.
I'd also add that Mike was a firefighter here at Newberg. For what years?
So I moved to Newberg in '91, and actually this was one of the earlier departments that I joined, and I was a volunteer here and worked my way up through the ranks, and lived on between 2nd and 3rd and Main. I was here when the siren used to go off on every call, and was really tickled when they decided to turn it off at 10 o'clock at night. But it was a different time. I mean, Buckley's was the butcher across the street here, and they were also on the volunteers. So you'd see guys with bloody aprons come running out with knives on a fire call. It was just I've seen the community grow. I know the community. I actually went to work for Lake Oswego I started in Lake Oswego, went to work for 12 Valley when I was living here in Newberg, and I've got to see it really turn into the community that it is today. So it's been an honor for us to be here. I know this process, I appreciate that you've never had this large a crowd to talk about fire district issues, and that's really a testament to the job that the district and the city's been doing. But I will tell you that we've been having these types of conversations in communities all over our service area, and I get calls literally every week from fire chiefs around the country that are contemplating the same types of issues that you are, asking, so how should we do this, and what types of things should we be talking about? I mean, this is not a specific issue to Yamhill County or to Newberg. This is a national issue that communities are grappling with on how do we afford the services and how do we potentially join forces to get more out of our tax dollars. So it's been a great process for us. So.
One last question, ballpark, do you have an idea when there were volunteers at Newberg specifically, how many of those came from the rural district versus in the city? I know you don't have the statistics, or I'm assuming you don't,
I
but
mean,
what's your guess?
there's a few, and this is, I mean, some issues that you'll have is most people live in the city. And those that live, I think, I don't know if you have the demographics specifically of who lives in the rural, but, I mean, the property owners in the rural probably tend not to be the younger generation, unless they're still living at home or they live right on the edge of town. And that tends to be the types of individuals we see joining the volunteer ranks. And so one challenge for the rural district will be, if you choose to do something other than TVF&R, is where are we going to find the volunteers that live in the rural district that will be available to respond in a timely manner. There are systems out there, Dundee actually being one, where they have some of their volunteers travel from outside the area and pull shifts, if you will, or stay at the fire station. That works so long as you can maintain that, but it's a hardship for those folks too to, now I'm sleeping someplace else. It can work in some cases, but it's whether or not you feel comfortable as a community and the fire district board feels comfortable. That's our solution for when people need to call 911. What we found in our service area is that might be a great way to augment staffing, but it shouldn't be, or they haven't been willing to make that their only option. And I started to mention, we've seen this not just in this area. We actually, July 1, finish up this same process in another rural fire district, which is Washington County Fire District 2, that actually meets Newberg Rural at the summit of Ball Peak. And it covers central Washington County, surrounds Hillsborough, and goes all the way to the skyline or dropping into Columbia County. So that 125 square mile district just went through this exact process. And they had a vote of their citizens that potentially this board could trigger for you to have a vote. And they voted almost 70% to the affirmative to join TVF&R. And we're going through the final steps with them leading up to the end of this month to make them just part of TVF&R. And they've also had staffing levels increase since they joined us. They also didn't even have advanced life support, so we staffed all their stations with paramedics. So,
what was their tax rate before?
Their tax rate, when you coupled everything together, was I think $1.76.
Yeah.
169. 169, and they went, and part of that was a local option levy, which I'll just tell you right now, if you don't understand the tax system in Oregon, then you're among friends. It's extremely complex. There's permanent tax rates and local option levies and bonds, and although the rural doesn't have anything but the permanent tax rate, or the city for that matter, that a lot of the communities, because of measures 47 and 50, that's the only way. If the community wants to augment services and it takes more tax dollars to make that happen, that's the only way that happens, is through a local option levy. And they're 5-year. It's a vote. It only lasts for 5 years, and if you want to continue it every 5 years, it has to be revoted. I saw a comment flying around on some of the social media where TVF&R is always on the ballot. That's true, because every 5 years we have to have the community say, we still trust you with that money, and we're going to say yes again and again and again. And we've had to do that every 5 years since 2000. So it happens on a regular basis, and it's confusing for people because they're asking, why are we voting on this again? We already said yes. It's because it's the state law, and it's just the way it works.
So that $2.08 a thousand, that's not a fixed rate?
No, it's not.
Is part of that, part of it's buildings and equipment, stuff like that. How much of it is personnel and operating expenses?
So our rates break down as $1.52 is our permanent rate.
That's what it is, okay.
Our local option levy that's at 5-year, we have to continue to get yes. And let's say a couple years from now, the vote is yes in the rural district and in the city, and they join TVF&R, and it literally takes, a year for these processes to happen to where you're actually paying taxes for TVF&R, and those votes come in, all the citizens would be voting along with all our other citizens throughout our entire service area on whether or not you want to continue to pay that local option levy or not. And if that answer is no, then our rate would go from, the local option levy is 45 cents, so 152 and 45 or 197. If that 5-year piece doesn't continue, it drops to $1.52 for everybody. And then the rest is paying off some bonds. In 2006, we launched a capital bond program, and we used it to do a lot of fire station work, seismic upgrades. We're actually, if the rural wants to build a fire station, you can't build a fire station unless you build it to a seismic standard. And to build something that won't fall down in a significant earthquake is a lot more expensive. So we had to do some of those retrofits and upgrades to our facilities, and so we did this district-wide bond, and we bought a lot of apparatus. Some of actually that you have in the bays out here. In fact, of the 4 apparatus that Newberg deploys today, 3 of those are TVF&R vehicles. To the 2 medic units, the medic units that were deployed here in Newberg had a lot of miles. They were well used, and TVF&R, through the contract, replaced those with new vehicles. We also, the ladder truck here, the truck that was here, needed a lot of repairs, so we took it out of service, and we brought one of our ladder trucks in to fill the void. Those trucks, if you buy one today, they're $1 million. They're very expensive, very sophisticated apparatus. And those bond funds were used in part with the stations and the apparatus to do the work. Once those bonds are paid off, that delta between 197 and where we're at today, around that 208 mark, goes away. It's just like paying off your mortgage. Once you paid off your mortgage, you don't have to continue to pay the bank, you're done. And once we pay those bonds are really, it's capital, it's a mortgage that local governments pay.
Earlier, it sounded like you said that there was going to be a vote by the people for the city, and at the other meeting, they had said that the council had to make the decision that it couldn't go to a vote. What changed between the two?
First of all, that's the city, that's not the rural district. So actually, we have, honestly, John, I have 0 to say about that as far as our input. He listened to, the podcast or the thing on the radio. I mean, that's the information we get from the city. So we have to go to a vote, period.
Okay.
So we'll make recommendations to the citizens, and then you guys get to choose what you want to do.
Okay, so that wasn't talking about the city voting, that was talking about us voting.
No, the city still has to vote. And one of the issues for us is that we can't really make a lot of decisions until the city decides if they want to go to $12 or stay their own entity. I mean,
I can clarify.
To make that
please.
clear, the city actually, by statutes, we've been told that the city council can make the decision unilaterally to request annexation to TVF&R. So they could do that without a vote. But the city manager today said that he's going to recommend to the city council that they do have a vote. Now, the vote could be just an advisory vote, and I don't know where I couldn't talk to. Huh?
I don't think he's there. I think he's just a vote.
Is it going to be a binding vote? Yeah,
Okay.
a binding
So
vote.
it's the kind of thing where they had the ability to just unilaterally make the decision.
They
but
did.
They can also opt for a vote.
Right.
Okay, good.
And one of the things they found out with that 200-person survey, 50% of the people that they surveyed said, TVF&R is great, let's just go with them. 25% said, we need a little bit more information to figure that out, don't know, but we're kind of leaning in that direction. And then 25% said, no, we want to stay wherever, So with that in mind, they felt that they could get a decent vote. And apparently, that's the first time I heard it would be a binding vote.
And all this will become crystal clear on the 19th. Because that's what the city council, I mean, this is a council action. And I'll just tell you, the way I understand the city council and why they were, some might ask, well, why would you ever consider not having a vote? And because the price tag to do a vote is $50,000. And the funds, I mean, the city didn't call us because they were flush with cash. They called us because they were having financial challenges. And so $50 means a lot to the city, especially now. They're trying to do some things they haven't been able to do. And so the statutes actually allow, because, and there's a lot of nuance, but because the city size compared to TVF&R's population, it allows for a governing body or a city council to actually just make the decision for the electorate. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, and clearly they heard the citizens want to vote. But really it came down to the city council saying is if they should vote or not. And I'll couple that also with the initial phase of this survey that John's referencing. The initial phase was actually a public gathering of, they call it a public attitude survey. There was some meetings that they had where they spent 90 minutes walking through this entire issue. And at the end of that, that group said, don't waste the money. That's why we elect the councilors and the mayor to make decisions for us. Don't waste $50,000, just do it. They then launched the survey. The survey obviously wasn't 90 minutes on the phone with people. It was only 15 minutes. And that's when they heard 60% of them say, we want to vote. And so that's why, and that just literally came out a couple days ago, the results. And now the city manager is comfortable saying, based on all this information we just got, this is our recommendation to the council. The council's got this slated for the 19th. I heard him say today they'll also take public testimony. They'll take all this information, they'll have their deliberation and make their decision.
Before you ask you, since we're talking about elections, I checked with the county clerk. If in November we had election, the rural patrons had an election, and that we were the only ones on the ballot, there was no other elections going on at that time period, it would cost us $46,000 to have that election. That comes out of the reserves of the Newberg Rural Fire Protection District. We have to pay for that amount. If there were others, for instance, if the city and Newberg, I just looked at my email on that before I left here, if the city and Rural Fire District voted at the same time, the city is about 73% because they have 14,000 voters. We have, 5,000? Yeah, voters. And so they take the percentage of each one, figured out how much the election cost, and we pay our percentage. So I didn't know stuff like that before I got involved in it. I thought, what, we have to pay for an election? But yes, we do. They have to pay, they have the cost.
But the difference between the city and the district, the statutes are crystal clear. The district doesn't get out of a vote. The board could say there is no other option, this is the only option, and they couldn't make the decision without putting it on the ballot. The statutes, and this is where Oregon statutes, they're in completely different sections in some cases, and they're very clear on the fire district vote, but on the city vote, there's a lot of different variables at play.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yes, with reference to your newsletter that some of my neighbors didn't get past the first meeting, which is what they say is basically common practice in Newberg. There's nothing in there for people of sound mind. It deals with capital budgets, capital improvement program budgets, overhead budgets, things of that nature, actual costs. And when we see in the newsletter that the consultant's results are not validated, I guess in a way it's good to get the bad news first. Okay, but it's not acceptable. Now, Chief, with all respect, I disagree that police and fire are the most costliest things. most costliest things are inept mayors and council, because they make the decisions. You folks risk your life and limb to save people like us, and I'm grateful. Now, with reference to what the Newbergians are looking at, it's not just a vote to go forward, it's a vote to change the city charter to be able to do that. And that is material, and that is necessary to keep a certain group of people at a certain period of time, now, 10 years from now, 30 years ago when they should have been planning for this financially, to make decisions that affect the entire financial outlook for the future. And with the decisions that I've seen by this council, I wouldn't give them $1. Really, I wouldn't. But I do thank the board for their service and all the firefighters for all their service.
We're going to get some more stuff, but please.
Could you explain what the options would be for our district?
That's coming up.
Based on what the city.
That is a great segue. Perfect. Yeah, one last question, please. Well, we have plenty of time at the end.
All the equipment you brought in Newberg, the newest fire, I believe it was the newest fire engine we had, there was a medic unit and the whole combination. Where's it at?
Well, I know one of them is in the bay. I don't know if you know this.
It was a gray and black. It was
Oh, you mean the engine?
Ambulance.
the engine.
Ambulance.
Oh, the engine.
And it's
We are
medic.
keeping it safe. Right. I should clear, so
Because I haven't seen it around town.
you are very observant. It is not in town. We actually have it, we have it stored right now in a very safe location, that if the city were to say, we want the fire department back, then we'll bring it back.
So it's not being.
We're not using it, no. In fact, everything that, if the equipment, the vehicles were in top shape and serviceable, we would still have them here. The fact is, they were high miles, they needed a lot of maintenance, so we actually have a fleet maintenance division, and they spent, weeks and months out there getting worked on. We have them placed they're inside in apparatus bays in some cases, and just kind of scattered throughout our 26 fire stations. And they're available if we need them, but right now we're utilizing these other apparatus to respond. And should everything go through and the citizens say yes in all cases, then we will determine what pieces should be kept, what pieces will be surplused. But until any of those decisions happen, we actually, per the contract, have to keep everything. We put stuff on pallets and bubble wrap them, and we save everything just in case the city says we want to put everything back and have TVF&R leave town, and we want to go back to doing what we were doing, that all the stuff that they started this process with, they get back.
Since Washington County District 2 was cited as an example, could you answer the question of, in the 125 square miles, how many fire stations are there? What is the population? And what is the staffing of the stations? And if there's a change, what will be the staffing under total TVF&R?
So there's 2 fire stations, and they're similar to the makeup of of Newberg's Rural District in correlation to the city of Newberg. Washington County Fire District 2, you could also call it Hillsborough Rural Fire District. I mean, that actually was the name when you go way, way back in time, and they broke off of being a city, Hillsborough City and rural, similar to Newberg, to a Hillsborough City, and Washington County Fire District 2 broke off as their own district. So there's one station in North Plains, in that small city and community that serves the north side of the fire district. There's the station in Midway, which is just over the top of the hill here in the Midway area, right off of Highway 219. When we started with them, their staffing levels were 2 career staff on a 24-hour clock, and they've had a lot of iterations. They were reliant on the volunteers to show up, and similar to Newberg, as of June 1st, They went to 4-person staffing as a minimum staffing. They don't have they don't run the ambulance service in District 2, so they only have a fire engine in the bay at each of those stations that staff with 4 career staff. And then they augment also with volunteers, similar to what Newberg does. And that the future staffing is the June 1st staffing. So that's the level of staffing we have at all of our fire stations. They're staffed with 4-person career staffing, and the reason we go with that 4-person career staffing on the larger apparatus is because it's the national standard based on call complexity and the risk that they can handle most everything they respond to without having to call additional resources. Over our history, we've had some vehicles staffed with 2 and 3 and 4. And what happens when we have something less than 4 is they end up calling for the additional units on a fairly frequent basis, which takes a city like Newberg, and instead of having 2 apparatus that can handle most of the calls, there's a lot more times when nobody's available because they're all on one call to have the adequate staffing to handle that type of a complex incident. So it's our model, and it works well, and we've really built the risk profile based on that, and there's a lot of other benefits the community gleans from that that potentially will come to Newberg as we move through this relationship.
Do you know the population, and would you know the assessed value also?
I don't have the assessed value off the top of my head, but the population is
Of Washington County Fire District
2.
2. The population is just over 8,000, I think.
Yeah.
I'd have to double check, but I can find it. Well, that might be registered voters.
Yeah, well, actually, I think it is higher, because
Yeah.
what's similar to the incorporated, unincorporated, if you're familiar with just north of Highway 26 and 185th, Rock Creek, that is a fairly old community. That is in District 2, because it's not in Hillsborough, it's not in Beaverton, it's unincorporated Washington County, and it developed. And that's part of the District 2 service area. As of July 1st, it's part of TVF&R. And we actually have a fire station right on the corner of it already. So they're in a good position.
18,400 people.
So 18,400 for that district. So it's larger than the rural district here, but when you couple the city, it's smaller than Newberg and Newberg Rural.
So what's happened in the last couple of years with response in the rural areas since you guys have taken over here in Newberg?
So,
In particular, I'm one of those guys on the selling volunteers, I'm on your side of it.
okay. So we've only been in our relationship with Newberg coming up on 1 year. So last July 1st is when we started this. We started just prior to that, I think it was officially March, we kicked off our relationship with District 2 just ahead of this. And if you're wondering, well, why these two at the same time or almost they overlap, totally coincidental. They were in a position where they approached us and said, hey, we'd really like you to look at us to provide service at the same time that Newberg did the same thing. So normally we wouldn't try to couple this up because I'd like to have a life outside the fire department, but it's just been busy. What's been happening is increasing costs of providing service, and as far as the responses over the years, we don't have a lot of data. I mean, there's data that exists, but there's you saw by the trend lines and responses, it's been fairly consistent in what's been occurring. You're seeing, I'm sure, in the rural area, you're seeing building. People are building on lots and doing things. I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Well, okay, so I've been up there 25 years, and many times over the years, I've rattled like the case of a new insurance company. I call them and I say, are you interested in insuring us? Okay, and they'll call down here and they'll say, you're in the worst possible fire protection category, in spite of the fact that Laurel Valley water has got reservoirs all over that mountain. So there's no apparent coordination to take advantage of those resources, or hasn't been. And I'm asking you, you guys are gonna it sounds like for us, you're talking about multiplying our taxes by 4 or 5 times. What are we gonna get out of that hole where we basically get almost, I'm not gonna say no fire service, I'm sure you guys will do what you can, but, I mean, am I gonna see a massive increase in that rate and nothing back for it, or am I gonna get great service, or where on that scale we're gonna be?
So let me share with you, this question came up at the last town hall that they had, and it must have been your neighbor was here. And what sounds like is going on is, some of the information that the insurance companies have is not accurate. The individual was here, last week was referencing, well, yeah, there's the Midway Fire Station with District 2, but my agent said they won't even look at it because it's staffed with 2 people and there are no volunteers and it's just completely ineffective. That's not true. In fact, there's higher levels of staffing at that station than there are at the City of Hillsboro's fire station. So it's, there's a lot of communities around that don't have 4-person staffing. And that's actually what the insurance companies look at for the levels that they say, okay, that's something that would be effective and worth us looking at the risk profile and potentially dropping the rate. What we referenced last week with that individual is to try to have the agent call us to get the facts. And if that doesn't work, we actually have relationships with the state insurance commissioner.
I actually have done that. Now, that was longer than a couple of years ago, and the results were pretty much the same. That's what the chief said, is you guys don't have much. It's more or less the answer to the companies.
If you haven't had them call since June 1st of this year, their information's inaccurate.
That's partly why I'm asking you what may have changed. Has that situation gotten better? I mean, would they get a different answer today?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it was fire protection category 13 or something. Maybe
Probably 10. 10's the worst you can be.
Are we still in that situation?
I don't believe you are, especially if again, I don't know your address and where you live, and even if you gave it to me, I couldn't tell you how close you are to the stations. But they use distance measurements from fire stations, and if you're within a certain distance of a fire station, and you actually get the best rate. Once you get beyond that distance, then things start to drop off. But in TVF&R, so you're at 10. If so long as today you're within 5 miles, the worst rate you'd be is a 3, which the best rate you could be is a 1, and it's dramatic, the increases in cost as you go from a 1 to a 10. And 10 is, and the sad thing for fire departments is, fire departments are doing a great job. They're still going to show up, and it may take them longer, but they give you the same rating as if you didn't have anybody ever show up. 10 is, they refer to that as no coverage, and that's not true with what you have going on, whether you're talking about old staffing levels or new staffing levels. Folks were going to show up, and they were going to do a great job with what they had. But it's just the way the insurance system works.
Part of this is, some of this may very well come back to us. I mean, we spend a whole lot more with you guys and a whole lot less with our insurance companies. I mean, maybe that'll be because our insurance is, quite expensive up in that area.
One thing you might do, when we started talking about insurance and ISO ratings and so forth, I called 6 different insurance companies that write homeowners insurance in our rural district. I got about 6 different answers about ISO. 3 of them didn't even know what ISO ratings were, and that's kind of the standard that everyone writes on. Some companies just have, they put it in their computer, it kicks out the answer as far as the premium is concerned, and you walk away with that. One of the things you should consider doing when your premium comes up, you get on the phone, talk to about 6 different companies and see what kind of relationship they have with reality in your district.
I was surprised last week how many of the citizens had actually done that. In fact, when they asked for a show, has anybody researched this? Most of the crowd said they'd actually made those calls and asked those questions. And we're actually going through right now a re-rate with ISO. And the reason that we launched it is you're supposed to do it every 5 years. there's 30,000 fire departments in the country, and every one of them is supposed to go through this process every 5 years. That hasn't taken place, but ISO is trying to change their process and do it on a much more regular basis. So we're in that right now, and we did it now, while we're going through it now, we asked them to include Newberg and District 2, just in case they join, and District 2, since we started the process, said we want to join. But once that information comes available, we'll know, based on the stations and the schematics now, what you'll be. And it will also be instructive if we get to the place where we decide, hey, based on the bow tie fire district we have here, we need a fire station or two to add. We can start to understand, well, where would we place those to take advantage of not only a better level of service, but, help folks with their overall budget and maybe maximize so we don't have any areas that are beyond the distance in the rural district. I mean, when you're trying to place a fire station, we look at street networks and where people live, so we place it to maximize the performance of that fire station.
So, thank you for segueing into that, because that was one of the questions I had. If you do decide that further stations are required, will that require a special bond levy to fund said stations?
So I don't believe so, and we would program it, so if we decide that there needed to be a station, and I haven't even launched the analysis because I don't know what the board's gonna say. And it is premature for me to launch staff on starting to study what that is. But if we did, we would program it into our budget. And we have a capital budget that we just allocate each year, a small portion of that to fund capital. We buy apparatus, and we build fire stations. And we, 26 fire stations, and if you go, well, they should last about 50 years, give or take. And these are numbers that aren't, in concrete, but that every couple of years we got to build another fire station, rebuild the fire station, and then we try to add stations as areas develop. And clearly there's a need, so we would be studying how we could accomplish that. And it's not
that would be TVF&R wide and not.
That'd be on us. So if you joined.
It'd be on the whole locality.
The whole district.
Whoever's paying into that.
When we did the bond measure in 2006 and we built all the fire stations, everybody paid for that. And that's why when we figured out where the stations are going to get placed, we pay a lot of attention to community equity. So if you're going to pay, then what are you getting out of it? And so we made sure we were placing fire stations where they needed to. Wes Lynn joined us back in 2000 and
1998.
That's when we started the contract. But they joined us right around 2000, and their fire stations were very old. In some cases, turn of the century. They were not seismically sound, and we replaced both of their fire stations. And actually, just last week, we broke ground on a third fire station that's being funded district-wide, and that's along with all the other portions of the community. And you would also enjoy that economy of scale if that occurred, or you were to join the fire district.
One thing I'd add too is if a station is built in a rural district, your insurance company is not unilaterally going to say, oh, we need to reduce your premiums. When your premium comes due, if that should happen, you call them and say, we have a new station here, I want a reevaluation of my premium.
Do we know when that re-rating will be finished? This way we can start counting them and say, hey, look at it again.
The staff member I have responsible for that wished it happened yesterday, because then I'd stop calling them. I really want that information available. What's that?
Like 3 months?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because they're so backlogged on not getting caught up with every 5 years, doing everybody, they're working really hard. But we're in the chute with a number of other jurisdictions across the state, and so I'm hoping within this next 60 days we have at least some preliminary numbers to know what.
Sometime in the fall, we should start having our insurance companies relook at the ratings.
Yeah, and if you ever have questions or you come up on that, I mean, call the fire district and just ask questions. And we can help make sure whatever you're hearing from them is the right information. You know, and because they make mistakes. Part of our district, several years back, they still had it classified as an 8, and it was a 3. And it wasn't until some citizens started calling us, asking questions, that we said, well, that doesn't sound right. And we made sure they had the information corrected. So I completely agree with John, though. Some agents and some companies may not know to check or may not check. It's a competitive marketplace, and you can.
If you're already rated as a 10, it's to their interest to just.
Yeah, but you can call around and ask questions, and you're clearly educated consumers. We're talking about government services tonight, but you can call and ask questions. It's a level playing field.
Perhaps we can get Eric to go through some of the rest of the material, and that'll maybe answer some of the questions you may have.
As a board, we've actually been very proud of the 43 cents per thousand. The biggest negative for us right now, though, is we've had this screaming deal. We use 60% of the city services. We paid for about that with 43 cents. If the city decides to join Fulton Valley, that goes away. We no longer have that option of contracting with the city of Newberg. So then we have to go through, okay, what are the other potential things we can do? So then we said, okay, well, what's important to the board and what we assume will be important to you? And most of the question you guys had there is exactly what we're talking about. You want 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service. In the middle of the night, when something happens, you want them there. You want short response time. If you live out top of Ball Peak, you want the short response time, not just for your fire insurance, but also to save your life, to save your building, to save everything you own in. And the fire engine with the ambulance. And so the ambulance is going to show up, but if there's an accident in the city, it's a volunteer fire department, and they have to drive wherever they're at to get over there, and they need the jaws of life, there's nobody there to save you. So we need to have adequate staffing is what that kind of comes down to, that auto crash one. And we want to be able to handle more than one call at a time. You've heard the chief talk about, the staffing levels and that kind of stuff. So we understand the staffing levels to be able to provide adequate protection for your home and everything. So then we went through basically our basic options. So we hired a consultant. Very cautious here. There we go. We hired a consultant to help us out, look at what some of our options are and the approximate rates of each of those options. And kind of the chief talked at one point, he's not assuming we're going to start doing it, so he's not going to assign a staff member to start doing a lot of extra work. So we had him paid a reasonable amount for a company to come in and say, okay, here's your options, here's ballpark prices they will be. If we choose one of those options that we could have them go in there and give us a lot better, or we think we're going to almost choose that option, we could have them come in there and give us a better estimate of the real cost of it. So the first option would be is to stay with the existing tax rate, 43 cents a thousand. With that, we have to recruit and train 18 to 25 volunteer firefighters. That, I think, is going to be a big challenge too. The pros are we keep local control, but with all volunteers, we go back to the other board. Are you going to have 24/7? What's your response time? And we looked at that, and we have a lot of reservations about going with that. It's inexpensive, but what are you really getting for it, though?
Sorry, I could have moved. Yeah, you moved on me.
And then option 2 would be to partner with an adjacent fire district. It would be mostly volunteer. We'd have to have a chief. And the problem with that, pardon me, goes back to the shape of our fire district. The only great thing is the city of Newberg here. We have a fire station over here and a fire station over here. That provides great coverage. If we went to Yamhill or Carlton or Gaston or one of the other ones, you're going to have a fire truck and et cetera here, and it has to go over there. You guys have all tried to drive down 99 on a Friday night. It's not good. You have no fire protection by the time they get out there. And that's a huge negative of trying to join another one. Yes, it's less expensive. We're looking at, again, these are all ballpark figures, but 91 cents per thousand. We maintain local control of it, But unless we're gonna build another fire station in the middle of it, and how much is that gonna increase our costs? I mean, yeah, we might be able to rent something, but against the seismic surveys and all that kind of stuff, and building to that is gonna be quite costly.
One of the things about this partnering with an adjacent department, our Chief Stearns, who was our consultant, was kind of using Yam Hill as an estimate, and that's what they're paying. They're paying 91 cents a thousand right now. So we would have to meet their level in order to kind of partner up and create kind of a larger district between both Newberg and Yam Hill. And that's why the 91 cents sounds weird, but it's, you'd have your 43 cents plus however many cents on top of that to make 91 cents. That would be the total. Yeah, 48 cents. So that would be the total that you'd wind up paying under those circumstances.
And that would be forming a new district to be able to do that, correct?
Eventually, what he was talking about, now this is the consultant, was talking about forming a fire authority. And that's something that's been done in Eugene area. And apparently they're looking at that also over in Gaston, Cornelius, and...
There's actually no such thing.
There isn't, as far as statutes are concerned, there is not.
Yeah, the fire authority model is something that is allowed in other states. There's nothing in the Oregon statutes that allow fire authority. And what fire authority was supposed to be is communities can come together and have kind of an umbrella of governance over the entire service area. It isn't allowed in the Oregon statutes. They call it a fire authority because it's the basis of the model, but there isn't uniform governance. So, for example, the Yam Hill example, only the citizens of the Yam Hill Fire District can sit on the Yam Hill Fire District board. And if they're contracted with Newberg, then you're not calling the shots per se on what Yam Hill Fire District does, like you would in a fire authority model. The fire authority model, the biggest example is down in California, where they have a fire authority, and down in Orange County, and they actually have 22 cities, I think, are a part of that authority, and they have a 22-member district board. Every mayor sits on the fire authority. I mean, if you saw a picture of their district board meetings, I mean, the dais goes and goes and goes and goes because every mayor is there and they're having to vote on things. I would not recommend that. But that's the basis of the authority, and why some jurisdictions around choose to call it that, I think just for lack of a better name, and some people can associate how it works in other states, but it isn't actually allowed in Oregon.
Well, the way he described it was that you have two 5-member boards, Yam Hill Fire District, Newberg Rural Fire District. 2 from each would then form this, quote, fire authority, OID, or whatever you'd call it. And they would be the ones that the chief over all of that area would be responsible to. That was the idea. But even then, he was recommending that eventually maybe you would partner with Dundee in the future and form a whole new fire district with Yam Hill, Newberg, and Dundee. It would be a very difficult thing to do as far as how we looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, because we have a few pieces of equipment, but we still don't have any buildings. So we still have to put the capital expenses out on all that.
And that's full volunteer.
It's still primarily volunteer. So if we go back to the original board, what do we want? We want 24-hour services, we want, It doesn't give us a lot of those. And again, one of the harder things for our district is the shape of it. We can't just have one fire station in the middle of a circle. It's a butterfly shape or it's a big challenge there as well. Option 3, we looked at building a station, staffing with 7 full-time firefighters. We'd have to buy some more engines, etc. And you're looking at about $1.45 for that option. So getting up close to what TVF&R would charge us. And we still have a lot lower level service. We'd still be relying on volunteers. And we've all talked about the volunteer issue at this point. I'm not going to talk about it too much. it would provide for 24 hours, 7 days a week coverage with 2 firefighters. But again, if the building's on fire, you can't go with there about 4 of them. I don't know if we talked about that. Did you talk about that this evening? Or?
Actually, that was on the bottom.
Oh, okay. So you need that basic level before you can enter a fire without risk of life. 2 in and 2 out.
2 in and 2 out. This is what we're referring to.
Yeah.
In a structure fire. If you only had 2 firefighters, and you guys correct me on that, if you would, please. 2 firefighters show up at a structure fire, and there's a rescue that needs to be done in the building. OSHA does not allow, I think it is OSHA, does not allow those 2 firefighters to enter that building. You need to have 2 firefighters to enter the building and 2 to stay outside for rescue of those firefighters if it's necessary. So that's a 2 in, 2 out kind of scenario. And some of these situations where you have just volunteers and very low levels of service, apparently you guys would have to stay out. If you only had 2 people show up and you've got a rescue situation in a structure fire.
If we have a known rescue, we're allowed with a 3-person crew to make entry, but commonly we show up and it's just a structure burning. When we ask, is anybody inside? The neighbors say, I don't know. Or, well, their car's here, but I'm not sure. Unless we can physically either hear someone or see someone or someone knows definitively, we're not allowed to violate the state and federal law. And the state and federal law is built on the basis of not killing firefighters. If something happens to those 2 firefighters when they're inside the building, the fire spread does what they call flash over, or there's a collapse, there needs to be at least 2 firefighters that can go in and rescue those 2 firefighters. One of the individuals outside is actually operating the apparatus, but in that particular situation, and why we run 4-person staffing, those 2 firefighters outside would immediately go in and effect the rescue of themselves and the victims. So we were in a place before our 4-person staffing where on certain calls we would, do exterior only operations and not make entry until another vehicle showed up with more firefighters so we could achieve that 4-person staffing. It's not optimal, and I had a lot of conversations with homeowners who were unhappy with me because our firefighters didn't go in and put the fire out. It's because we can't violate federal law just because the fire is burning. We can only do it if, in fact, there's a known rescue to be had.
So that greatly limits some of our options in there to what we want to, the service that we want to provide for everybody. And so the 3rd one would be build that, hire 7 firefighters, a new building, then we'd have to have 5-year levies. Every 5 years we'd have to go back up for it. And we've talked about a lot of stuff already, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here too much, but you can't, your chances of passing those every time. District 2, I believe, had some that didn't pass, is that correct, Chief? And then
They had to shut down staffing. They went from having career staff to no career staff at night. And so they had to wait for the volunteers to come from home. And so you can imagine driving here tonight, how long it took you to get here. Because volunteer firefighters don't have lights and siren in their personal vehicles, they drove to the fire station at the same rate you did, maybe a little faster, and then deployed the apparatus. But you add 3, 4, 5, depending on how far away from the station they live, to get the apparatus and then respond to the call. And every 30 seconds, if it's a fire can double in size, based on new construction or some of the contents. If someone has a cardiac arrest, they only have so many minutes until we're not able to revive them. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons why we require our crews to deploy on a 24-hour clock within 90 seconds of the bells going off. And that can be from a dead sleep. They are required to be in the vehicle and rolling out the door within 90 seconds. And I don't know for you how fast you get up in the middle of the night, but it's difficult to meet that. And during the day, it's easier, but you can't achieve that when you don't have career staffing unless the volunteers are down at the fire station.
So then we looked at option 4 of building our own fire station, hiring 12 staff. What would the cost of that be? And again, these are all estimates. And if we chose to do that, we'd get a lot better ones. But you're looking at about $2.35 a thousand. So you're more than Tualatin Valley is looking at. And I mean, the pros of it, we would maintain our own local control. But is that worth more money? And so we kind of looked at it and went, okay, you know, that is an option. And we put all these options up here for you guys to help us get input on. But again, you still have all those things we talked about. With any of these, you're relying on top three, you're relying on this. This one, you're relying on more paid staff. You have a question?
Just a quick question on, so when this does come up to a vote,
Yes.
then does the rural council decide this is the option we put out there, or do we get a choice of two or three?
It will be, we'll, with your guys' input, help to determine which option we want to put on the ballot.
So you could
Please.
put up one alternative or more than one potentially, whatever you guys.
That's my understanding, yes. John?
I checked with the county clerk, not really recommended it. If you have, say, we put all five on the ballot, check the box with all five. What happens when you have a tie of two? Then you're gonna, you already spent that money for that election. Now you're gonna have to have another election. And basically what is really suggested is that you have elected a board to at least make some of that filtered decision. So it comes down to the point of, you get to decide what you do. You know, you're gonna get one measure put in front of you, yes or no.
So the measure has to pass for anything other than the 43 cents to happen.
Yeah,
Correct.
43 cents, the first one, there'll be
The
no.
first one is
no
just what we've always had.
What happens in the case where whatever you put up fails, it goes back to that 43? What is the situation then?
That is one heck of a good question that we don't want to,
Well,
can I borrow your garage? So we got some apparatus to store in it. I mean, that's our issue. That's option one. If we can try to, that's option one, all volunteer. We have to go out and rent someplace to keep our equipment. And we have to go out and buy adequate
And
apparatus.
we have to get some used apparatus, you know, to be able to buy new ones.
Yeah, we have nowhere close to the amount of funds to buy it.
Essentially, we'd be without service.
Correct.
Essentially, and that's what
Correct.
the consultant said.
Yes.
Would you recover the equipment that is currently being rented
Yes.
from Newberg?
Oh, of course,
Oh, yeah,
yes, we own it.
that's our-
We're leasing it to them for essentially $1 a year to allow them to utilize it, to provide protection for
So
everyone.
there would be a minimal amount of equipment.
Yeah,
You have to have an engine.
we don't have a fire
We don't
engine
have
at
an
this
engine
point.
right now.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
you have a tanker truck and then the.
We do,
fire
yes.
truck,
Two reps.
so
Yeah.
You could provide a minimal
Yeah.
level of
Yes.
some kind of service.
Yes.
The issue.
I'm gonna
is
call you up
personnel.
and have you come over though to help fight that fire, because at this point, we have no volunteers, we have no paid staff.
And I understand
And
that.
that's our biggest problem, is that exactly your point, is we don't have the infrastructure. And our consultant, we asked him, you know, approximately how long can that take? And he said, you know, a good couple of years. And so for the next couple of years, we're gonna have minimal protection. I mean, we have to get the volunteers, we have to, it depends which one, you know, hire staff, hire a lot of staff, a little staff. I believe this one is hire one, a part-time chief at least, to help run the organization. And pass bond measures for each one of them, please.
You've been kind of saying, though, that we're really dependent on what Newberg decides to do. It sounds to me like, not necessarily. I mean, the rural thing could go with TVF&R, even if the city didn't, right?
Well-
That's something you guys could decide to do.
It is, but they would have to build how many stations? They'd have to build a station here, whatever else, if they don't have the city of Newberg. And so I've blatantly asked them, do you guys want us without the city? And they're like, well, we'll figure that out later. I mean, because they can't, I mean, they don't want to say, no, we don't want you, but without the fire stations already in the city of Newberg, they'd have a hard time providing adequate protection. You heard the chief talk about response times, this kind of stuff. That was one of your main questions. Without the city of Newberg, well, all these people in here are gonna have a heck of a time.
So Wilsonville is Tualatin Valley, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would assume, having some knowledge of where the stations are, that Wilsonville would pick up the one end of the
Yeah.
deal, and that Midway would pick up the other end, but that still leaves.
That leaves all this in here.
Right.
I mean, and so that's our question is, that's why we have to wait for the city of Newberg to make a decision. Because if the city of Newberg says, let's maintain our own, we could maintain the 43 cents a thousand, and if they would continue to have us, we could give them 43 cents and provide the same fire protection that you've enjoyed for the last 40 whatever years. So that's,
I
so,
doubt that they would do that.
it would be silly of them they would expect us to do a bond measure to help support them better. My assumption would be. Please.
I just wanted to clarify, for any of the cost over the 43 cents,
Yeah.
does that mean we'd have to vote on it every 5 years?
Correct.
Even if we annexed in?
No.
If
If
we
you-
annexed in, then we wouldn't have to vote every 5
Right.
years.
When you
Yes.
annex in,
It depends.
if you, TVF&R is a special fire district, just like Newberg Rural Fire Protection District is. We're no different. We operate under the same revised statutes. So if we joined TVF&R, we become TVF&R. We all have to pay the $2.08 a thousand.
So the rural district goes away.
But the rural district is
Yeah.
gone.
We get fired.
He said that it was $1.53
Yes.
as their basic operating budget,
For
and
the-
every 5 years, it comes back up again
Right.
to vote on.
Correct.
So
Right.
the answer to the question, if I understand it right, is our basic tax rate goes from 43 cents to $1.53,
Right.
and we vote every 5 years to maintain TVF&R.
Correct.
Okay.
45 cents. So it's $1.52 plus 45, which takes you to $1.97. The 45 cents, regardless, is unless the legislature or through some sort of initiative that passes, that you don't have, once you vote a local option levy several times, it's just permanent. I don't envision that happening. Everyone is going to continue to vote every 5 years, and we welcome that. If we're not doing a good job for all the communities that we serve today, then they get a vote at the ballot box on how, they get to answer that question for us at the ballot box. So we make sure we know. Now, if Newberg needed to raise money, the only method you have today is you can't raise the 43 cent permanent rate. You can only add a local option levy on top of it. The permanent 43 cents you have is actually written into Oregon's Constitution. That can't be altered unless you actually dissolve as an organization and create a new one. Then you get to create a new rate. But that I would not.
But you have to change the size of the district or something too. You can't just do that
You
willy-nilly.
can't just do that. You have to do what they call in statute as a substantial change, and substantial is up to attorneys to decide. But, for example, if Yamhill and Newberg Rural and Dundee all decided to go away and come back as one district, you could do that. The risk is, and why you don't see it happen very often, is if the citizens vote no, you have nothing. You don't get to say, well, we'll just stay Yamhill and Dundee and Newberg. There's no go back. And that's why communities across the state haven't chosen to take that trajectory.
One of the issues too, you brought up, for instance, on this fourth one, it was $2.35 a thousand. And so they passed the first option levy and you get the 235, but they don't do the next one. Now you go back to 43 cents a thousand. Whereas in their situation, they lose the 45 cents, they go back to $1.52 a thousand. They've got a lot better base they're starting with. We have a really skinny base they're starting with, which would put us back into with a very few service issues.
Please.
My husband and I are going to have to leave, but
Okay.
we're up on Mountaintop Road.
Yep.
2223 Northeast Mountaintop Road, and we would just like to put in our input that we would like number 5, so.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Gentleman.
So, if Newberg, the city of Newberg decides to not use TVF&R, then the rural district would then have to negotiate with Newberg on the amount that they would
Yes.
pay.
And I'm sure they would say, you're going to have to go for a local option levy, plus you're going to have to go for a bond levy because all of our equipment really old, and that's going to be a whole new deal.
Yeah.
And they'll probably have to go for a local option levy in the city also to be able to do that. And then you're pushing up against that Measure 47 that says that city governments and so forth they have a maximum charge of $10 a thousand. You can't get over that. And school districts is $5 a thousand. So you get into compression issues eventually.
But it seems to me that none of these options are valid until Newberg decides what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And that's one of our issues, is that we're in limbo right now until we're really hoping the city council figures out what they're gonna do on the 19th. I guess they will, on the 19th. But yeah, so we're doing all this stuff, not knowing what City of Newberg is gonna do.
Well, even at that point, even if they decide.
Yeah, until if they elect to go to November vote, we're sitting there in November going, I wonder what they're gonna do.
Then what do we do?
Yeah.
You know, so if they go to a November
Yep.
vote, I guess one of the options are that we could maybe put I don't know, have to check on this, can we put a contingency vote up? You know, saying that if Newberg passes to TVF&R, do you want to do that?
There's two things in one issue, yeah. So that's our issue, though, is that we're in limbo. I mean, so we're going through this and doing it all, and we don't know. But I just want to make one point. The reason we keep saying $2.08 or $2.09 is we want to be what it is today. If it drops back down, that'd be wonderful, but we don't want to tell you it's $1.53, and that's when we say, well, really, it's $2.09, just for truth. We want to make sure we give you all the data. This is what it is today.
The transparency through this whole process has been very commendable. Thank you for that.
Are your numbers based on, you mentioned early on the mill?
Yeah.
Numbers based on the mill as AV, so what happens if the mill gets annexed to the city to the numbers?
So our total revenue will go down. And so then instead of having $300,000 and change, it's going to be whatever it's going to be then. And we don't know, I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. Somebody really want to know, we could find out, but that's irregardless.
The assessed value was $980 million?
Yeah.
943.
Or $943 million?
Correct.
That mill property has got to be somewhere around $150 million.
I don't think it's that high, you know, I had some figures before on that for what's in the rural district now.
But it's not, the whole mill wasn't in it. It was, a portion of the mill was in it.
Oh, okay, because the whole mill, I mean, you look at the whole mill with because they do the property, the equipment piece and the.
Yeah, but that's also the real value with the tax assessed value and that kind of stuff, and I know nothing about the tax assessed value of the mill.
But one of the things that'll probably happen shortly here, no matter what, is the mill is probably going to petition the county to have their assessed valuation lowered because they're not producing anything anymore. And they have a right to do that. And so that's, again, going to lower our assessed value, which will lower our contract, or won't lower our contract with the city because it's based on our permanent tax rate. You know, so, but that's either here or there right now.
If the city keeps screwing around with this thing and doesn't get a decision made, would TVF&R extend an agreement with us being Rural Fire District, to give us more time?
Come on, Chief, we're putting you on the spot now, because we've asked this.
I'll guarantee you this, I would take that, so, what we learned going through the District 2 process is it is a process. I mean, the security blanket for all of you is, we can't do anything under the cloak of darkness and take you over. It's a process to go through, to get through the local, the county level process, the Secretary of State. It takes a lot of time. So, I mean, we have had some, albeit we kind of want to wait and see what the city does, but if things get kicked down the road, you know, I would definitely go back to our board of directors. And we entered into this process, so I think I heard somebody say, what happens if this doesn't happen, then what, we have nothing? We never started this relationship to hurt a community. So we're gonna do everything we can to help either transition them to being part of us or transition them to being okay on their own. So if that takes a little bit of time, whatever it is, we're going to work through that, because that's what our board has always done. I mentioned, this isn't the first time we've done this. I mean, we've over a dozen times in our history, we've had communities join together, and it never goes smoothly. And there's always a lot of questions, and the process takes time. So we would work through that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I don't hope we can meet the timelines that we started with, and why we're having these meetings and talking to folks, and potentially the city could be on the ballot if they choose to in November. And there's other opportunities before the deadlines to actually have a rural vote also. I mean, there's a lot of elections that happen every year that don't necessarily get exercised, but we could actually line up with and move through the process and have those answers on what is the city absolutely going to do because the citizens voted on it, and still put that out in front of the district residents so they understand what the future looks like with or without the city.
So we've already gone over.
Is that close enough to not answering your question?
Definitely.
I mean, I know our board has always said, found a way to make, we want to make you successful, whether you're part of us or not part of us. And if that means we need to add on to the contract or hey, we're going to continue to move through, but we didn't meet the Secretaries of State's deadlines, then we're going to work through that. Like you have always worked through it with the city on what components that worked and didn't work, so.
I'd say we've gone over at number 5 a lot, but the biggest one is there's no build time. If we go with them, the high-level service and no build time. We don't have to be in limbo for a couple of years. It'd be another huge plus for us.
Quick question.
Yep.
Where on this chart do you pick up 24/7 coverage with 4 firefighters?
Those bottom 2 there. The bottom 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4 and 5.
You get also with the hired 7 people, you're going to get you'll get 2
firemen at 24/7.
and firefighters.
Then you have the structure fire issue.
You're going to have a problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
So at the highest
So
level,
you're gonna
it's
have
the bottom 2.
Request other services.
And rely on volunteers. Yes.
So is there, at the county, state, federal level, is there something that says that a district or a city has to provide a certain amount of protection? Or can you just have nothing?
That is an interesting question because
I mean, because we could.
Yes.
apparently the way it can work.
Step in the state, or?
If, for instance, we put a ballot measure out there, we don't want any more fire protection, what happens is the county commissioners then have a responsibility to do something in that. And I looked on the statutes on that, and they can basically contract with somebody to provide fire protection in that area up to $2.50 a thousand. And they can go to bond issues, I think $12.50 a thousand, in order to provide fire protection for that area. Politically, it would be very, very hot potato for them to deal with doing something like that, forcing those kind of taxes onto people, but they have that authority to do that.
So they are required, basically, to some kind of protection.
Yeah. You got any?
And I don't have a lot of experience as being a local government provider in Yamhill County, but I'll tell you how Yamhill, or how Washington County, and I believe Multnomah County interprets this, is they may impose this, well, you have to have service, or they may say, well, all of you that have existing homes, then you just have no coverage. And you've obviously, as an electorate, chosen that option, so we're just going to let you do that. But what Washington County's said is, in these areas that don't have coverage, you can't get a building permit to do anything to your dwellings or build a new home on property if you have other property without negotiating a contract of some sort with a neighboring fire department. And how we've addressed that in like some of the far out reaches of the districts that we serve, because some of it gets out into unprotected lands or Oregon Department of Forestry property, is we don't want, you as a city resident or a rural resident to get a worse deal, or even in some cases the same deal as someone who lives outside who doesn't necessarily pay taxes. So you pay our tax rate times your assessed value, and the contracted area pays it by their market value. So it's potentially 25% higher, or depends on the delta between market and assessed value. A lot of fire districts have embraced that, but how Yamhill County may interpret this, if the district patron said, let's just go without, it would be a question to ask the county commissioners are we gonna be able to pull building permits or make any repairs on our home without negotiating a contract with a nearby fire service provider?
Go ahead, John.
Okay. So this is kind of a reiteration of what we talked about. Some of the considerations the board has to really work with is this local option levy problem of renewing every 5 years, and we already talked about if it goes away, you've got, say, seven hired firemen, and it goes away, and all of a sudden now you're back to 43 cents a thousand. You've lost. You're basically voted away your fire service and emergency services. During this build-up time, I'm just going through the logistics of how this thing would work. We'd have to hire some project manager to put the project together and get an estimator to do all the estimation. And we've never gone through a ballot measure before, but I understand there's professionals out there you need to hire to actually work up the ballot measure. We have hired an attorney that is well-versed in special districts. So she's given us an outline of actually how to handle things. But there's a lot of personnel we'd have to hire that the consultant really wasn't considering, because we're just a fire board. We don't have staff and everything else to deal with those kind of issues. And the other issue we already talked about too is the low rural density for drawing from volunteers. When you look at Yamhill or Dundee, they have that core city area that they can draw volunteers from. In the rural district, people are all over the place, and where are you going to find them? And then you have to get them trained. And both of the chiefs in both Yamhill and Dundee said they thought it would take us to do some of these other options 3 to 5 years to come up to the highest level that can produce. We'd be looking for someone else to help provide fire protection during that build-up time. It becomes really quite complicated. These are things that the board is having to wrestle with, and they're difficult decisions. What? Go ahead.
Well, a question that comes to my mind is, and I haven't heard it discussed in here, has there been any planning around a catastrophic event, like a level 9? For example, within the rural board, has there been any discussion about that? Within TVF&R, has there been any discussion about how your organization would address an event like that? Because there you have fires and infrastructure failure and a whole bunch of things happening.
Right. And we brought that issue up with Cascadia you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we brought that issue up to Chief Hallman quite a while ago. And there's no way they can stockpile all kinds of services and goods to supply the whole community. I think they have some things they want to do to try to keep their department functioning in those type of circumstances. But I'm sure that Mike has got some.
Yeah, we've done a lot of planning. We have a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of mobile assets. It really depends. And I'm flashing back when I lived here in Newberg. I went through the '96 spring break quake. Actually had damage to my home. And granted, it was no Cascadia, although it felt like it was at the time. Potentially you would have pockets of the fire district that would be more devastated than others. And 9.0 is going to be devastated everywhere, but we actually have plans where all of our fire stations, including the Newberg stations under our command and control, have plans that in fact we just exercised this last week, if we have a significant event, they basically report in through either the primary or alternate communication means, and then they start launching into the community, and they have routes already designated, and they have protocol how basically to operate without direction or without additional resources, and we exercise that on a regular basis. That said, if we have a significant earthquake, please do not expect the same level of service that we have today. It's an interesting question. We did the public attitude survey work a few years ago. We asked that question of our community of, if we have a significant earthquake, what do you think is a reasonable time that you should be required to wait before normal government services showed up? And what do you think the answer was?
15 minutes.
They actually gave us 45 minutes. I was thinking days, and they were thinking 45 minutes. So it was really generous. It is. I think some folks are a little disconnected on, if we have a devastating event like that, it's going to be a disaster.
Before you even get out of your neighborhood. I mean,
There's-
the way the county is set up with the roads and the creeks and everything else, the bridges would be gone and everyone would be landlocked.
There's a side issue you can look at. It's called On Shaky Ground. It's a booklet you can get online. It's got a lot of stuff of how to be self-sufficient under those circumstances. And that's what I'd really urge everyone to do. Also, one of the things you can think about is to join a CERT team somewhere. Go through CERT training. And they have it in Yamhill County, other counties also, but you can, my wife Jean and I have gone through that same training. And it teaches how to deal with those kind of issues. Incidentally, talking to Chief Jensen in Yamhill, they built their fire station for something like $360,000 back in the late 80s. They just got a grant of $600,000 to retrofit that for seismic issues. So that's another thing, I can appreciate how much in new construction, creating a seismic facility was really pretty interesting. The other issue, someone was asking me the other day, do you know how much Dundee's station cost? They told me $3.86 million is what that cost to put up. Now that's got 4 bays facing one way and 4 bays facing another. It's a huge, huge station. It's really pretty. If we did something like that, it ain't going to be 3.86 million. We're going to have to do something that would be very functional, that would be, but serviceable seismically too. I think we're at the question. We did. You want to do these points that we had, or
Most of the questions we've had, most of them we've answered, really.
I'll just go through this quickly because all this has been talked about here. TVF&R is the issue that we're really looking at seriously too. They provide full service immediately. There's no build-up time, as we already talked about. It's the highest service level, really higher than what we had with Newberg Fire Department, because we've got more staff on the engines. They have more. They can handle multiple calls at once because we have Midway and Sherwood and Wilsonville that can come into our district as well as coming out of Newberg from 2 different stations. Those are all things that really get our service level up there. And also the best rating for homeowner insurance that we can get with any of the other options that we have online. One thing that the board would like to know, like a couple that left earlier said, Marv Vorts is TVF&R. Have we got a feel?
Yeah, what do you guys, anybody wants, please tell us what you think of, and any negatives of any of the options. We've talked about a lot of negatives, some of them, but any ones we haven't thought of, we would love to hear them. Sir?
Now, with reference to these parcel taxes, because that's basically what they are. Now, are these restricted use funds? They can't be used for anything else. So what I was thinking of is that you get some yahoo mayor and council that decides that, well, they've got an extra surplus here. Let's take it out of this budget for another little project that we have. Or is this a restricted use fund specifically for fire? And what I mean by restricted use fund too, is that you hire your administrative component, which hasn't been even talked about tonight, and that Newberg or some other city decides to use that personnel for other matters to save their general fund budget so they can do other projects. And I think that needs to be addressed because you're talking a significant amount of money that is disparagingly, it's discriminatory per se on people that have, let's say, an $800,000 house versus a $100,000 house. And this is basically an Obamacare for fire service. And I particularly think that the restricted use aspect better be discussed.
Are you talking about if we choose to go with 12 Valley or each option
I'm just saying
individually?
is the funding that you get, is it a restricted use?
It has to be used for the fire, if we stay as a fire board, it has to be used by our board to provide fire services. And I'm going to let the chief speak to that, but I believe that's the same question,
We
same answer.
serve cities and we serve counties. They have no ability or authority to take our tax revenue.
Okay,
Aside from some things like urban renewal and some of those other tools where they siphon off portions.
Oh, wait a minute, let's back this up here. Urban renewal, burning a city to the ground is urban renewal. Okay, I mean, you're
But that's all, but that wouldn't be the rural district unless, none of your tax revenues would ever go towards those things because it would take the county to do that and that.
Well, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's even worse.
Short answer to your question is no. All the funds that we, and we're, essentially, aside from the ambulance transport revenue, we're 100% property tax funded, and 100% of those property taxes go to deploy emergency services in the community. They aren't used to fund any other projects or any other city services. It's 100% for fire and emergency medical services.
Okay, that answers the question. Thank you, Chief.
So the city council can't decide to funnel.
The city has nothing to do with us. Or nothing to do with, yeah.
208, whatever.
Yeah.
We're writing a check basically directly to
Right.
Walton Valley.
Yeah.
If we
So-
chose to go with them, that's
So
exactly.
the city patrons wind up getting, instead of just a one tax bill from the city, they have a separate issue, separate line item for TVF&R that they pay.
Yeah, they're getting stuff twice.
So, which brings up a valid point that you just kind of touched on there. What happens to our rural board? If we become TVF&R, does our rural board goes bye-bye, it's permanently abolished, and it all becomes permanently TVF&R?
Exactly.
Correct.
And established at the $1.52 or $3, whatever tax base.
Plus whatever local option levy or bonds that are in place.
Yes.
And so they dissolve as a board and the organization dissolves and TVF&R overlays the rural district boundaries down to where, I mean, if the rural board says go, part of the work we have to do is Cassandra launches through a consultant, going lot by lot and make sure the property line and the district boundary line are accurate, because that's what the Secretary of State expects. So we actually have to engage consultants to do, which is why this whole process takes so long.
Well, let me ask you this, Chief, with reference to what you just said. Now, you have assessors that answer directly, county assessors answer directly to the Department of Revenue for the state of Oregon. So I would say you can kick your consultants out the window and just put some
Doesn't
pressure on
work.
the county assessors.
It just doesn't work that way, and I wish it did, but it doesn't. But any one of you and any of the existing board can run for our board of directors, because our board of directors are at-large positions, and you can run for a seat on our district board. The other thing I was sharing earlier, the city was asking some questions. We have a 5-member board of directors that are at-large. There's actually one of our board members lives between Sherwood and Newberg today, and was here earlier today for a meeting that we were in. And we also have a 5-member budget committee, and something that just, our board has always had the philosophy that we want to have our elected groups, the budget committee, the board be geographically diverse. So we have some members of the board that live up in the kind of the Bethany, North Washington County area. Some live around Beaverton, Tigard, Wilsonville, West Lynn area, Sherwood, Newberg today. And then we also try to sprinkle in geographic diversity with our budget committee. So I talked to one of our board members today, and I said, would it be fair to say if Newberg and the rural joined that, and we have a vacancy come up on the budget committee, we'd be actively trying to find a candidate from one of those geographic locations? And they said, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you exactly when it would happen, but likely see with a lot of elected and budget committee positions, people have life changes and priorities, and they step off those commissions and groups all the time. So
Other questions or advice, please?
So, like our equipment at the Rural Fire District and the city or whatever, if we all annex in.
Yep.
Is it, I don't know, for a better term, get donated to Twalt Valley? Is that?
Yes.
That's the way we understand
That's,
it.
yeah.
There's a question that was brought up at the city club meeting today. What happens to the fire stations?
That was my next problem.
And
That's a city.
the city manager was saying, well, that's kind of, we're going to be talking about that. And I don't know, did you guys talk about that?
Well, I just tell you, traditionally, when an area's come in, the community built those fire stations and bought those apparatus, and we continue to operate those within the community. I mean, it's just the way it's worked. And you know, again, the city manager and I are having conversations about, you know, potentially, and when these things finally get through, we get into the kind of the annexation agreements on how these things transpire, but simply put, the stations and the apparatus get signed over, if you will, to us, and then we operate them. We also maintain them, we replace them. The apparatus you see out in the bay, the maximum they can be used is in frontline status is 10 years, and then you can use them for 5 years in reserve status. So we would be responsible for anything that's 10 years old to replace it. And I mentioned some of the price tags. You know, a truck's $1 million. An engine is, you know, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, depending on the sophistication level. The medic units are a couple $100,000. That would be on our dime. It wouldn't be something that we're not even allowed to launch a bond measure within a community to fund the apparatus that needs to be replaced at that station. The stations, I don't know why this came up, but there's a rumor that we'd close one of them. We need more than two today. I mean, we've been talking about the geography challenges, so we need those two stations to stay operational, and we plan to operate these two stations. Down the road, if the community continues to grow different directions, and one of these stations needs to be rebuilt, that doesn't necessarily mean we would rebuild it in exactly the same spot. And if you've been in our area and watched us replace stations, you'd see that we don't always put them back in exactly the same spot, because it isn't in the strategic location that the community needs it to be. We're all about response times, and if the community grew more that way or that way, then maybe we move this station a little further north or south. It just depends at the time when we're going to spend, you know, upwards of, you know, millions of dollars to replace a facility. We want to put it in the right spot to help, you know, create the best outcomes for the community when they call 911.
I have just one more question. So, if we dissolve the rural fire district and there's $500,000, I don't know what you got in that.
Yeah.
What happens to that money?
That goes also over, and that could even be considered seed money for a new station too. You know, I mean, you know, outside of any agreements.
I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, I'm just.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's a question we've asked. No, it's a great question.
Essentially, the money that we have in reserve right now was to be spent on, and matter of fact, I set up in the budget for a new fire engine to replace our old one, because it was 22 years old. And at the time we had that ready to go, it was in the budget, ready to go, and then all of a sudden all this happened with TVF&R, and it was suggested that they don't need an additionally new engine. So we did not spend that money, even though we had appropriated funds for it. And then it came a situation, well, what are we going to do with that old engine? And it turned out that Carlton was kind of knocking on our door. Chief Lusich really needed to have an engine, and instead of letting this one just sit and deteriorate, the board decided to go ahead and donate that to Carlton, because the amount of money that we would have gotten for it wouldn't even cover the repairs to make it serviceable. So they wound up getting it free. They serviced it up to a decent level of response. Now they can bring that into our district as mutual aid, should we need it, you know, where we border their district. So it's kind of getting dual use for us. But we have that money now still sitting in our reserve fund.
Please.
apparatus that is certified but older than 15 years, that's the standard. You can't use it.
It's a liability for the organization. So should something bad happen, that will be part of the question, is why were you still using that equipment when it was beyond its serviceable life? And it's just a liability for the organization. So it's why we've adopted to, replace it, because one, usually the maintenance costs outpace the actual value. I'll just tell you, right, if your 401k includes fire apparatus, you gotta sell it. You gotta get out of it. It's amazing how little we get for used apparatus on the market. To say it's not even worth, in some cases, a few $1,000s when you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for it isn't a stretch. So we replace it. We try to actually place it with rural fire departments across the state that really have no other options. They just say, we're going to take the liability because we don't have a different plan. And that has been our outcome. And it's why we helped the rural board place it with Carlton, and our fleet maintenance folks helped Carlton get things rolling. And now I don't know if it's in service yet, but I know they've had it for a little while.
Is it? Okay. It's getting late, it's after 9. Any other questions or any input?
Or any advice too. I mean, say, if you have opinions, we'd love to hear those.
It's a tough decision.
Option 5. You like option 5?
Option 5, yeah.
Thank you.
If you had right now to say fire board, after we've seen the options, which ones would you recommend? How many would, kind of say, well, option 5?
Option 5, I mean, $2.31 versus $2.08, it's already a 5-fold increase. I don't need it to be a 6-fold increase.
And I think you guys get to see the level of professionalism they have here. I mean, when you ask them any question, they're like, category 9 hurricane or earthquake rather, blah, blah. They know it. They've already done studies and everything.
I have firsthand experience with TVF&R. My kids burned my garage down when I lived in the wall. So I have firsthand experience with that. And I have firsthand experience with Newberg.
Yeah.
So I have no complaints and nothing but the highest praise for TVF&R. So,
thank you.
The men and women that put their lives on the line to protect our property and our lives, my hat's off to them.
I'd second that one, totally.
Absolutely.
I would say if it has to go to a vote, and I'm probably for Quality Valley Fire and Rescue, but if it had to go to a vote, you give option 5, and then you pick like 3 maybe. You don't go with 4 where it's obviously a more money for less service, but you don't go with no service. That would be my suggestion.
My understanding with the measures, et cetera, that's challenging to do because we have to have, because you have to have a measure to dissolve the board and to join theirs kind of thing. So if you get 3 or 4 of them in there, I think it's a huge amount more of a challenge. That's one of our issues that we have to look at limiting it, making sure it's legal.
Just look at measure 50, 37, and 5.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole fiasco was all based on, well, if this one passes, and then they had to
A, B,
pass
C,
this
and D.
one, and they didn't pass it.
Yeah. And do you want to speak, Chief? Please.
I'll admit, I have a bias. I mean, I'm wearing the uniform. You could have, obviously there's going to be a lot of dialogue. The board's going to have a lot of decisions to make. The current 11 cities and counties that ever serve us, any one of them could say, you know what, we don't want to belong to you anymore. We want to start our own fire department, which is kind of the conversation you're having as one of the options. You can start up your own fire department. If we as an organization and I as the fire chief don't do a good enough job, you could down the road, you could join TVF&R and down the road say, you know what, this isn't working for us, and we want to try option 3. And we would have had to, if we didn't go with TVF&R and we didn't stay with Newberg, we would have had to constitute our own fire department anyway. So that's the risk for me, is I always need to make sure that if you join us, you never look back, that you never regret that decision. Because that's what all of the citizens that are a part of TVF&R today have to hold over my head, is any one of our cities or any one of our communities could band together and say, Sherwood and King City and Tualatin could say, we're tired of you folks. We're going to start our own fire department. And they could do that through the same process that you're talking about here.
But if that happens, what do we do about equipment? Because you've got all of our equipment in our buildings and our funds and everything.
That would get all worked out in the transition of the assets and things that we're talking about doing. I mean, I'm not going to say it was easy. This isn't easy. But it could happen, and it's the risk for me that I need to make sure that whatever you're paying, that you see that as valuable, and you see that as worthy of your saying yes at the ballot box and your support, or you don't see it as valuable anymore. You think you're getting a raw deal, and you find John and say, "Hey, John, let's fire this thing back up." That's the potential outcome for you down the road.
One last thing, Chief, with TVF&R, how often do you have financial audits and or performance audits?
Every year? Every year we put together we have a whole litany of processes. We constantly have auditors in our building, third-party auditors. But our budget document gets reviewed. We put together a CAFR and a PAFR, which if you have a financial background, you know what those acronyms mean. But it's just a lot of process. And then we have a third-party audit constantly. And you can actually go to our website, just tvfr.com, and you can see all of our stuff is transparent right there. You can dig into it. You can see the audits. You can see the PAFR and CAFR.
You've answered the question very firmly and succinctly. Thank you, Chief.
Let me add to that too, that the Rural Fire District also has financial reviews. We don't rise to the occasion very often where we have to have an audit, but that has happened before, and we use a CPA firm in McMinnville, Bernards and Associates, and they do an annual financial review. It's about 20 pages that they do every year.
Thank you.
Well, can we be done tonight?
Yep.
Thank you for attending.
Yes, thank you,
We really
everyone.
appreciate everything you guys spent this 2 hours with us.
Good job, guys.